Well, this is the end. It took me the better part of 2024 playing so many gacha games to figure out the one thing I look for the most when it comes to my main games. I came to realize what drove me to continue playing these titles for the long term. In May, I decided to quit Genshin Impact to play Wuthering Waves as my open world gacha, and only recently, I decided to quit that as well. Sure, the animations were high quality, the world and the set pieces were pretty to look at, and Kuro Games' generosity made me feel appreciated. However, Wuthering Waves was not able to do the one thing that I thought Genshin would not. A darker, grittier tone that was not afraid to go beyond the family-friendly and almost whimsical boundaries of Genshin. Some of the later story chapters are pretty good, don't get me wrong, but the one thing I value the most to get me invested in a gacha game is world building. I'm very much drawn to developers that do ambitious things within the game world, or its characters. What if a playable character canonically dies in the story? What if the main protagonist canonically marries a summonable gacha character? Snowbreak kinda did it with huge success, but I wanted something that's a little, less gooner. But then I remembered, there was one game that I played this year that really felt different from the rest. The premise felt fresh, the world felt dark but intriguing to explore, the characters felt varied and dynamic. The game I'm talking about, of course, is Zenless Zone Zero. I'm just kidding, it's Limbus Company. If you don't know Limbus, I strongly recommend watching the original Atrocious Gacha review video on it, as it introduces a lot of the game's mechanics, as I will be using some in-game terms, like clashing, for example. But let's be honest here, the majority of people watching this are long-time Limbus players. So I sort of have a love-hate relationship with this game. I haven't logged in since May, so I was able to qualify for the returning player event. As for the reason I quit at all, well, let me just show you an image. This image will explain a big part of the reason I left. You ready for this? Here we go. Yeah, let me make something very clear. Limbus Company is a gacha game. Yes, you can farm the shards to get the characters manually, but it's still at core a gacha game, and this kind of stuff can happen. One thing that kept me playing was the story and the world that Limbus has. I recently started Library Runa, but I don't know how long it'll take for me to go through that. The setting of the city is uninviting, but it's interesting to learn about. I wanted to go even deeper into the main campaign now that Season 5 is out, and, well, that's when I got into another major barrier. When I returned at the end of Season 4, I went through some of the interlude stories before Kanto 6. I did the Christmas one, story sucked by the way. After that, I tried to complete the Blade Lineage Intervallo. This chapter has a boss with a negative sanity gimmick. Basically, in a nutshell, if you're not a Limbus player, you generally want your team to have high sanity points and the enemy to have low sanity. But this one works the other way around. You actually want the boss to have high sanity. Now, I haven't been playing for the longest. The only team with real synergy I set up was a team revolving around the mechanic sinking, which reduces sanity points on the enemy. I didn't know this boss had this gimmick before I built it, but you can see how this doesn't mesh well with the boss's mechanic. Now, in before the countless skill issue comments, let me just say that I don't have all the time in the world to troubleshoot and find every gimmick in the game. I prefer to just enjoy the story and move on. Yes, I know a valid strategy with Kim is to avoid clashes altogether, but that hasn't worked after a couple tries. I knew a ragtag team of just good IDs wasn't going to cut it. So at that point, I thought, well, I might as well just wait until Season 5. By then, the Season 3 characters get added to the dispense pool, so I'll just farm some shards and form a different team. Until then, I couldn't really do anything else. Since the story accounts for a lot of Limbus' content, being stuck here means I can't play Kanto 6, I can't play Refraction Railway, and I can't play the Intervalos past Chapter 6. So I decided to just farm for the Season 4 characters. Yeah, I know, they go away when the season changes, so I might as well get them before they're gone for like 6 months. Having difficulty spikes in gacha games is nothing new. Some people actually like them. But one thing I've always appreciated when I played FGO is that the game gives you these team revival items. It doesn't matter how you clear the level, because if you just use these to help you win, you just get to continue on with the story. But I think I would have appreciated if something like that existed in Limbus Company. There's an EX objective for every story stage, so an easy way to still encourage proper team building is to forfeit the EX reward if the player uses the assist item to help them win. That way, those that only want to enjoy Limbus for the story can do that and still give a reason to go back and complete it normally. I say this because during Kanto 6's release, Project Moon did have a round of nerfs for some of the combat encounters. I firmly believe this was the right choice. The typical mobile game player plays on their daily commute or during their breaks. These mobile games reward short bursts of playtime. You shouldn't have to grind or spend a lot of time on a main story level. If a big portion of the player base is complaining about difficulty in the main campaign, Project Moon should absolutely do something about it. I know Library Ruina has its share of difficulty spikes too, but that's a single-player game. You can put in the grind if you want to farm ego shards, that's fine. But the main attraction of the game should not have a big barrier behind it. You either give assist tools to let players beat it for now and come back later, or just nerf the difficulty. Gacha games are casual in nature. If a player wanted a harder game, then Project Moon shouldn't have made Limbus into a gacha. The thing about Limbus Company is that the new player experience is just not good. The game mechanics are fascinating to get into, but the game does not give nearly a good enough explanation of how everything works, and, not everyone knows how to read. Anyways, being stuck at this part of the story, I also had some chances to practice team building of my own. Given that Mirror Dungeon sets all your IDs to level 45, I was able to learn how certain mechanics worked, like how to set up egos for Sinking Deluge, or how to use Wild Hunt Heathcliff's unique counter skill, or how Sinclair worked. Limbus Company by far, from a conceptual standpoint, is the most complex gacha game I've played. There will be a lot of reading, because unless you're drawn in by the lore and the characters, it could potentially be quite difficult for a new player to get into the game mechanics. Imagine if they got Dawn Office Sinclair as their first 000 ID. Where would they even start with this? There's a couple more things I can nitpick, like how sweeping a level gives less rewards for whatever reason. Most gachas with this feature just lets you sweep for free with no drawbacks. I really don't see how it makes for a better experience to make you farm these levels again and again manually to be efficient. Typically, when I want to talk smack about a game, I usually start with the good stuff first so I can focus on the bad stuff. As you can see this time, it's the other way around, because the highs of Limbus Company are peak. For one, not having an RNG gearing system is a breath of fresh air. I know gacha games need some way to retain players, so Project Moon went the way of making maxing out a character just a little bit grindy. But I still prefer this system over the former. In this game, you use the common gold currency Limbucks to purchase upgrades. There's XP tickets for leveling IDs, threat for uptying, and I guess shards for the 12 sinners, but that's kinda it. Another huge selling point is the monetization. You cannot whale in Limbus Company, at least not nearly as much as other gacha games. There's no limit break system, so if you have one copy of an ID, you have the best possible version of them. This is unheard of in the gacha games I've played. Limbus doesn't make the most money when you rank it against other gachas, but the community is very active. The main way the game monetizes itself is through the Battle Pass. This costs around 10 to 15 bucks depending on where you live, but the value for this is immense. While there are some sweet rewards in the premium tracks, such as the Battle Pass egos, much of the value comes from the ego shard boxes that you can farm for. Given that you can level the Battle Pass indefinitely, if you do your dailies and grind the Mirror Dungeon roguelike mode a lot, you can make out with hundreds of these boxes. Collect enough shards and you can guarantee a copy of the character you want in the dispense pool. This is ridiculously generous. In fact, an often talked about strategy is to simply refill your stamina using the gacha currency, then instead of dealing with the RNG of the gacha, you can just farm for the character. It's actually way more efficient to do this, as you can always get unlucky. So in place of that, if you put in a certain amount of effort, you will get a certain amount of reward. Obviously, not everyone will be able to do this if they don't have a lot of time to play, but the option to grind is there. Here's the thing, you can't farm Primo Gems in Genshin. Gacha games typically give out a controlled amount of the premium gacha currency to make sure that you can't get every character for free. From their perspective, you shouldn't be allowed to farm them, since the gacha is how these games make their revenue. One more topic before going into my main point with Limbus was the content patches for the past 5 months or so. We all love a little bit of drama every now and then, so has there been any of that since? Well, there is one thing in particular I want to talk about. The Ring Pointillist Yisang released in May, and this ID was quite talked about regarding its power level. Some players thought that Project Moon was going to nerf him because of just how busted he is. Finally, the decision for the nerf was planned but ultimately cancelled. While there were nerfs of how ego gifts worked with this kit, the kit itself is untouched. This was the correct move. The amount of drama and backlash the nerf would have received is just not worth it. So for now, this broken character is still dispensable as part of the general pool. Looks like I got some farming to do. And now I want to talk about the big one. You can be generous with the rewards given out, you can be responsive to player feedback, and you can have flashy and engaging gameplay. For the record, I don't judge a gacha game by its story in my reviews since story is kinda subjective. What works for me may not work for somebody else. I've spent most of my college days reading some of the best visual novels of all time, so when someone says that a gacha game has a good story, my standards are sky high. That being said, for whatever reason, gacha game stories are cursed to have an average beginning and only start to get good later on. Path to Nowhere being probably the only exception I've seen so far. Limbus' story, it's okay in the first 3 or so chapters, but it's clear that the quality has been ramping up. When I played Wuthering Waves at launch in May, one of my primary reasons to switch over from Genshin is that I thought I would be able to break away from the way Genshin writes their characters. It's not that the entirety of the story is bad, it's just I never felt any of the characters had much substance to them. As in, I didn't really want to learn more about them, even doing most of the character story content was just whatever. At least that's what it seemed like to me. I'll provide an example of this too. When the Inazuma region first released, you had to complete Ayaka and Yoimiya's character stories to continue with the main chapter at all. It happened 2 years ago, but I still remember this pretty deeply. There was an animated scene where she danced around in a pond, so I guess that counts for something. One thing about gacha games is that due to its free-to-play model, the main way they make money is by having players pull on the characters. Meaning it's their job to sell these characters to you. May that be their backstory, their design, their gameplay, or in Zenless Zone Zero's case, how many gooners they can please. So as I played through Ayaka's story, I thought to myself, did I experience a lighthearted, hopeful story about Ayaka trying to find her brother, or did I just watch a 1 hour-long advertisement? I find that both Genshin and Wuthering Waves has this way of writing that they never dive into themes that are too ambitious or off the mark. Depicting someone get stabbed is just way too much, not very advertiser-friendly. Now, from a visual standpoint, these games are absolute spectacles. The animations and the character designs are all pretty top-notch. Wuthering Waves was able to distract me for a couple months with its post-apocalyptic world, though I could never feel that it completely escaped Genshin's method of writing stories. Let's compare the recent Shorekeeper story arc, for example. The story is essentially about this loyal companion that's waiting for the rover's return. It's a feel-good plot, and while the backdrops at times are jaw-droppingly beautiful, I think most players would agree that the story arc is just decent. For me, decent is just okay. And I definitely had some fun exploring Wuthering Waves' world, though the story being presented like this doesn't really motivate me to learn more about the characters. But at least Wuthering Waves lets you skip these, unlike Genshin. One thing that stuck out to me with Limbus Company is that the art feels really distinct. It's not afraid to depict mature themes, and for once the character in the world has a lot of substance. I think Limbus' cast is one of the strongest I've seen in a gacha game. Throughout this year, only Limbus and one other gacha game got me genuinely interested in the characters and its world, enough for me to be okay with dropping money on it and committing to it in the long term. You can pause the video now to guess what the other game is. Believe it or not, it's the upcoming game Heaven Burns Red coming to global later this year. I find that the story for these games are still character-focused, but it comes off as more organic, as it's more about their dynamics with the world and each other, instead of only having set dynamics with the main protagonist. I've said this in a previous video, but something I love to see in gacha games is when characters interact with each other, not just to the player. That being said, judging from my hard stop in story progression later, you might think that I won't be seeing Kanto 6 and onwards for a while. I hope you haven't been too quick to type those skill issue comments, because as you know, spite is one of the most powerful motivators. That only fuels me even more. This got me thinking. Sinking is my only decently built team. But given my experiences with this slashy boy, I'm dead by turn 4 anyways. Why does it matter if his sanity is lowered? This guy clearly cheats. I need a way to cheat back. I know how Sinking Deluge works, I know how Wild Hunt Heathcliff works. I'm thinking, we lock in. Who needs to clash when you can go face? I can tank these hits, save the blunt skills until Kim gets staggered, and so comes the ultimate turn. Since this fight is pretty much a DPS check and there's no way to stop Kim from using this broken skill unless you roll really high, I just needed to do enough damage to reach his stagger threshold. And well, a miracle finally happened. Now all that's left to do is to DPS him down. Use the blunt skill saved up earlier, use the Sinking Deluge nuke, hit him with the ego since Gregor sucks, and what do you know? You thought it couldn't be done. You thought I had a skill issue. You better delete that comment right now. After that, I just ran with the Sinking team for the rest of the story I missed. It performed surprisingly well in Kanto 6. I'm starting to think this Wild Hunt Heathcliff guy is pretty good. After clearing Kanto 6, Refraction Railway unlocked, which I'm a little bit surprised by since Season 4 is over and it's still available. I managed to get through the first 2 sections, and while I'm sure I can probably make it past section 3 as well, I just kinda gave up on it since I don't really want to spend that much time on challenge content. I'll be slowly making my way through all the intervalos in Kanto 7 eventually. I grinded Mirror Dungeon quite a bit this past couple weeks, though I'll probably be dedicating more of my time to Heaven Burns Red when it drops next month. That's kinda like my return to this game. I think there's a lot to like about Limbus Company. Its mechanics are pretty complex for a gacha game, so for a new player, understanding it could take a while, but it's pretty satisfying when you pull off those big numbers. It's good to see a game that doesn't focus on the gooner aspect. If you enjoy gacha-related content like this, you know what to do. So after all that, I will say, Limbus Company do be Limbussin'. I need to go.